There's nowhere you need to be tonight. There's nothing left to do. Whatever the day held, its weight, its brightness, its demands, you can let all of it rest now, gently, the way a stone settles into sand. You don't have to put it down all at once. Just loosen your hold on it. Let your shoulders drop a little. Let your jaw soften. Let the space behind your eyes go quiet. You are about to be somewhere else entirely. Somewhere unhurried. Somewhere that has been quietly waiting. Patient as limestone. Patient as tide. A place where the air itself hums at a frequency just low enough to feel rather than hear. Where the only light comes from a small amber flame. And where the work of the evening is slow and careful and entirely without urgency. Take one slow breath in. Let it out even more slowly. Feel the surface beneath you, the weight of your body, the warmth of the blanket or the pillow, the particular stillness of this room, this hour, this quiet. You are safe. You are warm. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. And now, so gently you might not even notice the moment it happens, you begin to drift somewhere else. Not quickly. There is no quickly here. Just a slow and easy sliding, like water receding from a flat stone, like a tide that knows exactly where it is going and has no reason to hurry. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath move in its own time, and follow the sound, that low, almost felt hum rising from the stone, passing through everything, steady as a heartbeat and twice as slow. Follow it down. Follow it out. Follow it all the way to the edge of the shelf. The first thing you notice is the air. It is cool, not cold, not uncomfortable, but genuinely cool. The way air feels when it has been in contact with stone for a very long time, when it carries the memory of deep water and mineral dark. It moves against your face in the gentlest possible way. Not a wind exactly, more like a slow exhalation. The breath of the shelf itself, rising from the emptied tide pools spread out below you in the dimming gray light. You are standing at the outer edge of a vast limestone shelf, a wide, flat expanse of pale rock stretching away in both directions, farther than you can clearly see in this light, which is the quiet, diffuse light of a sky that has long since given up its sun. Above you, the rock of the continental overhang extends outward like an enormous low ceiling, its underside rough and ancient, streaked with the slow stains of mineral water, dotted here and there with things that cling and wait. Below the lip of the shelf, 9 meters down now, the sea, or where the sea was. It has withdrawn for the evening, exactly as it does every evening, pulling back with that long, slow patience, leaving behind a dark, wet plain of flat rock, interrupted by depressions, pools, channels, all of them slowly filling not with water now, but with air. Still, settled, mineral-scented air that sinks into the pools and sits and begins, very slowly, very quietly, to hum. You can feel it through the soles of your feet, that low resonance, that vibration in the stone, almost below the threshold of sound, and yet unmistakably present, unmistakably alive. The limestone here has a particular quality, some arrangement of chambers and densities in the rock that makes it behave like the body of an instrument, like the wooden belly of something made to sing. When the still air settles into the emptied pools and the air pressure of the evening stabilizes, the whole shelf hums, not loudly, not insistently, just continuously and without effort, and as naturally as the stone breathes, which is to say, barely and always. smell here is salt and mineral, and something older than both. Brine that has been in contact with limestone for so long that the two have become a single scent. Neither entirely sea nor entirely stone, but something in between. Something that has no name in any place where people live quickly. There is also, very faintly, a thread of something warmer. Lamp oil, heated gently, not burning aggressively, but simply glowing. And it draws you along the shelf toward the glow. The workshop appears gradually, the way all things appear in low amber light. First, as a warm suggestion against the gray, then as a shape, then as a low roofed structure, open on 3 sides to the shelf air, its back wall pressed into the stone face of the overhang itself, carved into it, continuous with it. The roof is a natural ledge of rock extending outward from the overhang's base, barely high enough to stand beneath, and it has been fitted with a few planks of pale driftwood along its edge to keep weather from coming in sideways. The floor is the shelf itself, worn smooth in the areas where feet have moved most often, still rough and granular toward the edges, still carrying the faint abrasive texture of ancient ocean-worked limestone. A single oil lamp sits at the center of a wide, low work table. Its flame is small, the size of an almond maybe, amber, and very still in the sheltered air, and it throws its light in a pool across the table's surface, catching the curves of shells, the rim of a ceramic basin, the handles of small tools arranged with patient precision along the table's far edge, around the lamp, on the table, on drying racks above and beside it, on every available horizontal surface. Shells, hundreds of them, maybe more, in every size from the length of a thumb to the length of a forearm, in every shade of the pale spectrum, ivory and cream, and the faintest blush of pink, gray-white, and bone-white, and the translucent near-white of something held briefly to a light. Coiled shells, and chambered shells, and long tapered shells, and shells that open flat, like a hand held out palm upward. Shells left behind by creatures that no longer exist. Acoustical instruments the sea once played, now gathered here, catalogued, cared for, tended. The Shellwright is at the table. She is not young, and she is not old. Or rather, she seems to have arrived at an age that no longer particularly concerns her, as unhurried in her own years as the shelf is unhurried in its tides. Her hands are the most expressive thing about her. Wide-palmed, careful, steady. The kind of hands that have learned through long practice to hold fragile things with exactly the right amount of firmness. Her hair is pulled back simply. Her clothing is plain and worn and clearly comfortable. She is bending slightly over the table, holding something between her thumb and 2 fingers, a pale whelk-spiral about the size of a closed fist, ivory white with faint gray-rose banding along its ridgelines, and she is holding it up very slowly toward the flame. She does not look up when you arrive. This is not rudeness. This is simply the nature of this work. It requires all of one's attention, and there is room here for a quiet visitor, always, as long as the quiet is maintained. You settle yourself just inside the open edge of the workshop, out of the shelf wind, close enough to see clearly, and you watch. The low hum of the shelf comes up through the stone floor and into your feet. The lamp flame breathes without moving. The smell of limestone and salt and warm oil surrounds you like a room within a room. The Shellwright turns the whelk-spiral very slowly in her fingers, bringing different surfaces toward the flame one at a time. A patient, methodical rotation, like turning a globe to see each continent in turn. In the amber backlight of the small flame, the shell becomes briefly translucent along its thinner sections. You can see the light pass through the outer walls in places, illuminating the interior curve of the spiral in a warm glow, like light coming through a paper lantern. And in that glow, the Shellwright is looking for something specific. She is looking for hairline fractures, those infinitesimally thin lines where the shell's structure has stressed and begun to separate, often invisible in flat light, only revealed when the right light passes through from behind. She rotates the shell again, slowly, a millimeter at a time, roughly, her eyes moving along the ridge lines, along the body whorl, along the curved lip of the aperture. There, along the outer ridge of the second whorl from the base, a hairline fracture, barely there, a thin, pale suggestion of a line that might be a shadow or might be a crack. She brings the shell a fraction closer to the flame. The light passes through. Yes, a fracture, not severe, not the kind that means a shell is beyond help, but a real one, needing attention before it spreads, before the hum of the shelf catches in it and opens it further, the way a singer's note can open a flaw in glass. She sets the shell down on the work table with great care, resting it on a small cloth ring so it doesn't roll. She straightens slowly, and for a moment, she simply stands, looking at the shell in the lamplight, her hands resting loosely at her sides. Then she reaches to the basin. The ceramic basin is wide and low, pale cream-colored, filled with cold seawater, gathered earlier from the tide before it withdrew, carried in a sealed vessel, and poured here at the workday's beginning. She submerges both hands, and you can hear the faint sound of water moving against the clay of the basin. A soft, liquid sound, barely there. She holds her hands in the water for a moment, just resting them, letting the cold settle into her palms, chilling the skin evenly. Then she lifts them out and lets the water run back from her fingertips. There's a small jar near the basin, its lid set beside it rather than on top. Inside the jar, a paste, limestone powder mixed with cold seawater, the consistency of thick cream, pale and faintly granular, smelling very specifically of the shelf, mineral and salt and ancient stone. She takes a fine tool from the row on the table's far edge, something like a small stylus, its tip the diameter of a pine needle, and she dips it into the paste. She returns to the whelk-spiral. What follows is very slow. She brings the stylus to the hairline fracture on the shell's second whorl and begins, with extreme gentleness, to work a thin line of the paste into the crack, not pressing hard. The pressure here is so light that you might almost wonder whether the paste is reaching the fracture at all. But the paste is designed for this. Its particles fine enough to enter the narrow gap on capillary action alone, drawn in by the shell's own dryness. She moves the stylus along the fracture line in one direction, then withdraws it, turns the shell a degree, and works it along again in the opposite direction, ensuring the paste penetrates evenly from both sides of every surface irregularity. The smell of the limestone paste rises very slightly as she works. That cool mineral smell with its thread of brine underneath. A smell that is somehow both clinical and deeply natural. like a doctor who is also a geologist. The low hum of the shelf rises through the floor. The flame holds absolutely still. Outside the 3 open sides of the workshop, the dark shelf stretches away, and here and there, in the emptied tide pools below, you can hear, very far off, barely audible, the faint sound of the last of the sea's withdrawn water, trailing over flat rock, a distant, rhythmic softness, like the sound of someone turning pages in another room. When the Shellwright finishes working the paste into the fracture, she sets the stylus down. She picks up a small, dry cloth, worn soft by long use, pale from many washings, and she uses the corner of it to remove the very smallest amount of excess paste from the surface around the repair, leaving only what has entered the crack itself. She holds the shell up again toward the flame, a slightly different angle than before, now looking to see how the paste fills the fracture's light, whether the thin, pale line has become invisible, absorbed into the shell's own coloring and thickness. Almost completely. She sets the shell back on its cloth ring and presses the tip of her thumb, very lightly, along the repaired ridge, just feeling. The shell is still cool. The paste is not yet cured, but the touch tells her something. The way the surface accepts the pressure, whether there is any give, any softness where there should not be. There is not. She nods, just barely, more an exhalation than a gesture, and reaches for the damp sand. Along the back edge of the work table, nearest the overhang wall, there's a long, low tray of damp sand. The sand gathered from the lower shelf at the tide line, where the sea's withdrawal leaves it dark and packed and heavy with moisture, perfect for curing. It holds its shape when pressed into, holds the impression of whatever rests within it, offering an even, yielding surface that will support a shell in precisely the position it needs to hold while the limestone paste sets. The Shellwright draws the tray toward her, the wooden base scraping softly on the stone table, and she presses both hands into the sand, palms flat, and then curls her fingers to make a shallow depression, a nest just large enough for the whelk-spiral. The granular drag of the damp sand under her palms is very fine, very particular. Not rough, not gritty, but quietly abrasive, in the way of very old stone ground, very fine, over a very long time. She smooths the edges of the depression with the side of one finger. She considers its shape. She adjusts it slightly, pressing out one side a millimeter, building up the opposite edge by gathering a little more sand. Then she lifts the whelk-spiral from its cloth ring and lowers it, slowly, into the sand nest. She settles it with absolute care, the repaired whorl facing upward, not pressed against anything, allowed to breathe and cure in the open air, while the shell itself rests supported everywhere else. She removes her hands from around it. She looks at it for a long moment. The shell sits in its damp sand bed in the amber lamplight, ivory pale and quietly curved, its spiral running from the narrow tip down to the wide aperture in a long, slow unwinding that took the creature inside it, whatever that creature was, whenever it was, years and years to build. The paste in the fracture is invisible now. The shell looks whole. The Shellwright dips her hands back into the cold ceramic basin, holds them there a moment, lifts them out, and lets the water fall. She selects another shell from the drying rack above the table. This one is different longer, narrower, a tapering cone shape rather than a spiral. Its outer surface covered in a pattern of very fine ribs running lengthwise from tip to opening, each rib separated from the next by a shallow channel, the whole surface giving the impression of something carefully pleated. It is a creamy gray-white, almost the color of old paper in the lamplight, and it is larger than the whelk-spiral, the length of her hand from wrist to fingertip. She turns it toward the flame. The outer walls of this one are thicker, and the backlight from the flame reveals less. The light cannot pass fully through in the way it could with the whelk-spiral's finer walls, but she is looking for different things here. The ribs, closely spaced, can hide cracks in their shadows. She brings the shell very close to the flame and tilts it so the light rakes across the surface at a low angle, turning each rib into a sharp-edged shadow stripe. She runs the tip of her thumbnail very gently along the deepest channels between ribs, feeling rather than seeing, reading the shell by touch, the way you might read in the dark. She works from tip to opening, one channel at a time, unhurried. This shell is intact. No paste needed tonight. She sets it back on the drying rack with the same care with which she lifted it, and the faintest sound follows. The soft, dry sound of shell on wood, barely a sound at all. You have been watching for some time without noticing time pass. This is how it works in this place. The absence of urgency does something to your sense of duration, loosens it, lets it spread and thin until it is not a line anymore, but more like a field, a wide and quiet field that you move through without direction or destination. The low hum of the shelf is always present beneath everything, steady as the stone itself, and your feet on the floor have been in contact with that hum long enough that you have begun to feel it as part of your own body, a low, settled vibration, somewhere in the soles of your feet and along your shins, a resonance that is not unpleasant, that is in fact deeply comfortable, like the feeling of a sound that was always there, but that you are only now noticing. The Shellwright moves through her work without speaking, without hurrying, without the particular tension that people carry when they are watching the time. She selects a shell. She holds it to the flame. She examines it with her eyes and her hands. She works the paste into whatever fracture she finds, or she finds no fracture and returns the shell to the rack. Each shell gets its full attention, regardless of size, regardless of condition. The tiny, cowrie-shaped shell, no longer than a fingernail, gets exactly the same patient examination as the large, flat shell, the size of a dinner plate, that she lifts with both hands and tilts sideways to the light. She finds a fracture in the flat shell, a longer one, running across nearly a quarter of its surface, a significant crack that will take more paste and more care. She returns the shell to the table and takes a wider tool, something like a small spatula, flexible, its tip as thin as a playing card's edge, and she begins working the paste along this longer line with the same unhurried patience as before, if anything slower, given that a larger repair calls for more careful management of the paste's consistency, its depth of penetration, its evenness. She dips her hands in the basin again between passes, and again. The cold water is part of the process. Her hands need to stay chilled so that the warmth of her fingertips does not affect the paste's cure rate when she tests the repair with touch. Outside the workshop, the darkness has deepened. not dramatically. There was no dramatic brightness to begin with, but the quality of the dark beyond the open sides of the workshop has shifted from gray dark to true dark. The color of deep water, the color of the space beneath the overhang where no light reaches at all. The emptied tide pools on the shelf below are invisible now, but their hum has, if anything, grown very slightly fuller, or perhaps it has simply grown more noticeable as the other sounds of the shelf have settled. The distant trailing of retreated water over flat rock has quieted. The shelf is still. The only sounds are the almost sound of the hum, the occasional faint click of a tool set down, the soft movement of water in the ceramic basin, and very occasionally, just once in a while, the thin, barely audible tone that rises from one of the shells on the table when a particular frequency in the shelf's hum passes through it and resonates in the shell's interior chambers. That thin, brief tone, there, just at the edge of hearing, a single note held for a moment and then released, like a thought that surfaces and then settles back into the water. You breathe in the smell of limestone paste and salt brine and warm oil, and you feel the hum in the soles of your feet, and you watch the Shellwright's hands. The flat shell's repair takes a long time. She works the paste along the crack in both directions with the spatula tool. She removes excess with the dry cloth. She holds the shell to the light, not the oil flame this time, which would be too close for a shell this large, but she tilts it toward the dark, open air of the shelf, where some faint, ambient quality of moonless night, reflected off pale limestone, offers just enough light to see whether the crack has been filled along its full length. She is satisfied with some sections and not others. She can see this in the slight pause, the slight forward movement of her head, when she finds a section where the paste needs more work, and she returns the spatula to those sections and works them again. When the flat shell is finally ready, she presses a sand bed for it in the long tray, a wide, flat depression, and she lays the shell face down into it, the repaired crack uppermost, the whole flat body of the shell supported evenly by the damp sand beneath. She smooths sand around its edges with her fingers. She presses the center of the sand bed gently, testing whether the shell rocks at all, whether any single point of the sandbed's surface is bearing more weight than it should. She makes small adjustments, and when the shell is perfectly still, perfectly settled, she removes her hands. She straightens. She rolls her shoulders once, slowly, the way you do when muscles have been held in careful tension for a long time and are glad to be released. She looks at the drying sand tray, where two shells now rest, the whelk-spiral in its nest, the flat shell in its wide depression, and her expression is that of a person looking at work completed well, or at least work completed, which at this hour amounts to the same thing. She dips her hands in the basin, holds them there longer than usual, lifts them out. Now she turns toward the wall of the overhang. This is the niche wall, the back of the workshop, where the shelf meets the overhang face, and where the Shellwright has, over years, over a long and patient time, carved a honeycomb of small openings into the soft limestone. Each opening is just large enough to hold one shell. Each opening is shaped to the specific shell it was made for. Not a general shape, but a particular shape, carved to fit one specific specimen in one specific orientation, so that the shell sits in its niche the way a hand sits in a glove made for that hand alone. The niches are arranged in rough rows, running from the floor to about the height of the Shellwright's chest. Above that, the rock changes character and is harder to carve, and there are, by the look of it, close to 200 niches in the wall. Many are occupied. Many. Each occupied niche holds a shell that has been fully examined, fully repaired where necessary, fully catalogued, recorded in the Shellwright system of small marks made along the niche's edges in the limestone dust. A private notation that tells her what she found in this shell, what she repaired, what this shell adds to the chord. Because together, all the filled niches together, they make a chord. This is the wonder of this wall, and it is a quiet wonder, entirely without drama, the kind of wonder that only works if you are paying the right kind of attention. The shelf's ambient hum, that constant low vibration in the stone, passes through the overhang wall and into the niches, and from the niches into the shells that rest within them. Each shell, being a different size and shape and thickness and interior geometry, responds to the hum differently, some amplifying it, some filtering it, some resonating at harmonics of it that the hum itself does not contain, drawing new frequencies out of the stone by the particular mathematics of their own acoustics. And together, all 200 of them, or however many there now are, the count shifting each time a new shell is placed and an empty niche becomes occupied. Together, they produce a chord. Not a loud chord. Nothing about this place is loud. A barely audible chord, a collection of tones spread across a wide range, some very low, below comfortable hearing, felt more than heard. Some in the middle range, present and smooth. A few very high and thin, like the last fading note of a struck bell. And they shift as the tide air changes, as the shelf's hum responds to the night, as the temperature in the stone moves through its slow evening arc. The chord is never exactly the same from one moment to the next, but it is always a chord, always a collection of tones that belong together, that have been brought together by the Shellwright's careful arrangement and the physics of the shell wall and the deep grammar of the stone beneath. You stand near the wall now, close enough that you can begin to hear individual threads of the chord. There, a low, round tone, barely distinguishable from the hum itself. There, a middle tone, a little clearer, a little more present, with a slight wavering quality, like a note hummed with vibrato by someone very far away. There, at the edge of hearing, almost above it, a thin, bright thread that rises and falls in tiny increments as the air temperature shifts. Together, they are something. A sound that has no name in the world of clocks and weather forecasts and things that need to be done. A sound that belongs only here, on this shelf, in this dark, in this cool mineral air that smells of salt and old stone and warm oil. The Shellwright is at the wall. She is holding a shell that she carried from the drying rack, a small, cowrie-shaped shell, the length of her thumb, smooth on its upper surface, and toothed along its narrow aperture on the underside. Its color, a warm, creamy tan, banded with faint stripes of brown-gray. She has already examined this one. It needed no repair, being one of the structurally complete shells that occasionally arrive on the shelf still intact. She holds it in her left hand, and with her right, she finds the niche that was carved for it. She knows exactly where it is. There's no searching in her movement, just a direct and quiet arrival. She brings the shell to the niche and she presses it in. The soft click of a shell settling into its niche is one of the smallest sounds you have ever heard, and one of the most complete. A tiny, dry, resonant click. The shell's surface meeting the limestone of its carved bed. The shell coming to rest in the exact orientation for which the niche was made. And immediately, as if the wall had been waiting for exactly this addition, the chord shifts. So subtly that you might not be sure you heard it shift. But yes, there is something new in it now, a small additional thread, a tone from this particular shell's interior resonating with the shelf hum through the limestone matrix of the niche wall, adding its frequency to the collection. The chord is slightly fuller, slightly more complete, or perhaps differently complete. The chord was not incomplete before, but it has changed, the way a conversation changes when one more thoughtful voice joins it, not filling a gap so much as changing the character of the whole. The Shellwright steps back from the wall. She stands with her hands at her sides, and she listens. She listens for a long time, long enough that you also begin to listen. Your own attention settling into the chord, the way your eyes settle into a view, after you have been looking at it long enough to stop thinking about looking. The chord breathes around you. The hum persists in the stone beneath your feet. The amber flame on the work table holds very still. After a while, she returns to the table. There are more shells to examine this evening. She returns to the drying rack and selects another, a long, tapering auger shell, its tip a fine point, its body spiraling down to a relatively wide opening, its surface covered in a dense and complex pattern of fine ridges, crossing at angles to create a texture like woven cloth seen from a distance. She holds it in both hands. It is too long for one, and brings it toward the flame. The light passes through the tip, which is fine enough to be translucent, even in this modest flame. She examines the tip carefully. This is where auger shells most often crack, at their narrowest point, where the structure is most delicate. No fracture visible. She moves the flame examination down the body, section by section, the way a careful reader moves down a long page, giving every line its attention, not skipping ahead even when the reading is easy. The body of the shell is thick and shows no light through. She relies here entirely on touch, running the pad of her thumb along the woven ridge surface in slow strokes, covering every face systematically. She dips her hands in the cold basin, returns to the shell, runs her thumb along the opposite face. This shell, too, is intact. She sets it back in the drying rack. She selects another, and another, and another after that. The work continues in this way for some time. The quiet rotation of selection, examination, repair, or no repair, return to rack or placement in sand. And the evening deepens around the workshop without pressing on it, the way deep water deepens around a stone without moving it. The shelf outside is entirely dark now, its pale limestone surface invisible, except where the amber light of the workshop spills out across the nearest few meters of the rock floor. In that spill of amber light, the texture of the shelf is very clear. The pitting and rippling of the stone surface, the occasional small, empty depression, the granular quality of the rock where the sea has worn it, but not smoothed it, where the limestone's grain is still visible if you look closely. The distant sound of retreated water is entirely gone now. The shelf is still and silent, except for the hum, and the chord from the niche wall, which continues its slow shifting, its overlapping tones moving against each other in patterns that are too complex to follow consciously, but that register somewhere more fundamental than thought, somewhere closer to the body's own rhythms of rest and wake and rest again. You find yourself breathing more slowly, in time with something. Not quite the hum, not quite the chord, not quite the Shellwright's own breathing. Something that is all of these, and also quieter than all of these. Something that was already in you and has only needed the right conditions to surface. The Shellwright pauses in her work. She does not stop for any particular reason. No task completed. No shell requiring a different tool. She simply pauses. The way a person pauses when the evening has reached a certain quality of quiet, and it would be wrong to fill it. She stands at the table, with her hands resting on its surface, not quite touching any of the shells near her, and she looks toward the niche wall. In the amber light, the wall is a study in texture and shadow. The niches, roughly hexagonal in their arrangement, catching the lamplight on their upper edges and going dark in their interiors. The shells within visible only as suggestions of pale color, as slight curves emerging from the dark of each chamber. The wall breathes its chord. The Shellwright breathes with it. She reaches out and, with one fingertip, touches the edge of the nearest filled niche, just the stone rim, not the shell within, and she holds her fingertip there. You can almost feel it yourself, the vibration passing through the limestone into her fingertip, the shelf hum transmitted through the rock and the niche wall, and the shell within and out again through the stone between the niches, an endless patient cycling of frequency through structure. She holds her finger against the stone. She closes her eyes. She stands like that for a long time. When she opens her eyes, she goes to the basin again. Both hands deep in the cold water, held there, and her face in the lamp's amber light is entirely at rest. The particular rest of a person who has been doing the right work in the right place and knows it, not with pride exactly, but with a simple and complete certainty. She lifts her hands from the basin. She reaches for the dry cloth and presses it around her hands, not rubbing, just pressing, absorbing the water. And now she pauses over the sand tray. She checks the whelk-spiral in its nest, pressing the tip of one finger very gently near the repaired ridge, testing the cure. The paste has set enough. It will hold. She lifts the shell from its sand nest and holds it in the lamplight and turns it once, just once, a slow, single rotation, to confirm the repair is invisible, to confirm the shell is whole. It is. She carries it to the niche wall. She finds the niche for it without hesitation. A small, whelk-shaped niche near the middle of the wall, third row from the floor, slightly right of center, carved to fit this exact shell's curvature, its spiral orientation, the particular angle at which its aperture should face to direct the resonance most effectively into the wall's interior. She presses the whelk-spiral into its place. The soft click, the settling, the chord shifting. A new thread, round and low, the whelk-spiral's interior chambers adding a warm tone just below the chord's previous lowest register. deepening it, giving it a new foundation, something the other tones can now rest on more fully. The Shellwright steps back and listens. You listen with her. The chord is fuller now, not dramatically, but genuinely, in the way that a room is warmer when someone lights a second candle. You can feel it in your chest, in the place just below your sternum, where sound that is low enough becomes a physical presence rather than an acoustic one. The low tone of the new whelk-spiral, joined to the hum of the shelf, joined to the 200 other tones of the other shells in the other niches. All of it together, breathing in the dark. There is still the flat shell in the sand tray. Its cure will take longer. The larger repair, the longer crack, the thicker paste required. The Shellwright glances at it, touches the edge of the tray without disturbing the shell, and decides. It will stay in the sand until morning. This is not failure. This is the nature of the work, that some repairs take longer, that patience is not always rewarded quickly, but is always rewarded correctly. She straightens the tools on the table's far edge, straightens rather than cleans. The cleaning comes later, replacing each one in its exact position in the row, the smallest at the left, the largest at the right, the stylus and the spatula, and the dry cloth, and the small pair of calipers she uses to measure the niches when she is carving new ones. Though she has not been carving tonight, she lifts the limestone paste jar and settles its lid back on, pressing it down with both thumbs until she hears the soft seal of clay against clay. She covers the ceramic basin with a flat stone disc kept beside it for this purpose, sliding it across the basin's rim until the water is sheltered for the night. She carries the stylus and spatula to a smaller basin near the workshop's right edge. A rinsing basin, this one. Its water, not cold seawater, but fresh water, slightly less cold. She dips the tools and runs her thumb along each of them, removing the last traces of paste. She rinses them again. She sets them on a small stone ledge to dry. She dampens a cloth and wipes the surface of the work table, slowly, in wide circles, carrying any scattered limestone dust or dried salt to the table's edge and off. The table surface, clean, reflects the lamp's amber flame in a small, warm oval. She looks at the reflection for a moment. The drying racks still hold several shells that have not been examined tonight. There's always more to be done, and this is not a problem. It is simply the nature of a collection that continues to grow as each tide retreat leaves new items on the shelf below. But tonight's work is done. The tools are rinsed. The repaired shells are curing. The new niche occupants have been installed. The chord has been added to. She draws a low stool from under the table and carries it. It is a simple thing, just a section of dense timber with 3 short legs, the kind of stool made once and kept forever, to the place in front of the niche wall where the chord sounds fullest. She has identified this place over time, the way musicians identify the sweet spot in a room, the location where the acoustics gather rather than scatter, where all the overlapping tones arrive at their most balanced. It is not directly in front of the center of the wall. It is offset slightly to the right and a step or 2 back, where the open geometry of the workshop's 3 sides allows the sound to travel and return in a particular way. She sets the stool down. She turns and adjusts the oil lamp, lowering its flame slightly, turning the wick control with 2 fingers in a slow, measured movement, watching the flame's height decrease from almond size to something smaller, something more like a grain of rice, amber, and very still. The workshop becomes darker. The niche wall retreats into greater shadow, the shells within their niches now barely visible, soft, pale presences in the dark. The lamp still burns. It will burn slowly through the night on the remaining oil, a low and patient glow. But its illumination is now the minimum, just enough to see the shapes of things, not enough to read by or work by, enough only to simply be in. The Shellwright sits on the stool. She sits straight, not stiffly, but with the natural straightness of a person who has spent years in this chair, whose body has found the posture that allows long sitting without tension. Her hands rest in her lap. Her eyes are open, or mostly open. You cannot quite tell in this light, the amber light reduced now to its minimum warmth, the stone floor and work table and niche wall all existing in gradations of deep shadow. She listens to the chord, and you listen with her. The chord is present. It is there. It has always been there. But now, in the reduced light, with the tools put away, and the basin covered, and the work of the evening complete, it seems to come forward, to occupy more of the available quiet. The low, round tone of the whelk-spiral added tonight, the warm, middle tones of the larger specimens in the middle rows, the bright, thin threads at the top of the range, barely audible, like light through very fine cloth, all of them together, shifting in the slowest possible way as the night air settles, and the shelf's hum responds to the temperature of deep night, the hum itself shifting in frequency by the smallest measurable increment, and all 200 shells responding to that shift in their own ways, the chord changing as the night deepens. The smell of limestone and salt and warm oil is everywhere. The low vibration of the hum is in the stone underfoot. The cool, dry air moves across your face in that barely their way, that slow exhalation of the shelf. You are very comfortable. You may not have noticed until this moment quite how comfortable you are, sitting in the low lamplight, in the cool mineral air, listening to the chord of 200 ancient shells fill the dark space of the workshop. But yes, very comfortable and very quiet inside. The Shellwright's breathing is audible now, in the deep quiet, not loud, just present. A slow and even movement of air, in and out, as regular as the tide was before it withdrew, as regular as the hum in the stone. And your own breathing, you notice it too, has settled into a similar rhythm, not mimicking hers, just settling, finding its own slow pace, the pace that your body chooses when it is allowed to choose freely, when there's nothing pulling it faster. In and out, in. The chord shifts. One of the middle register tones rises very slightly, a warm, smooth rise, and then a gradual fall, like a note held by a voice that is also breathing. The amber light on the work table is very small now, a grain of warmth in the dark. The pale oval of the ceramic basin's stone cover catches a little of that light and holds it, a small, pale disk in the shadow, like a low moon. The drying rack's shells are dark shapes now, curves and points and spirals reduced to silhouette, each one a suggestion of the object it is, each one patient in its place on the wood. The niche wall breathes its chord. You feel the hum in your feet, in your shins, a little in your hands, now that you are still enough to notice. The Shellwright does not move. She sits with her hands in her lap and her eyes in the middle distance between herself and the niche wall. And she simply receives what the wall sends. That slow, patient chord, that overlapping of 200 ancient acoustics in the dark, that barely there music that belongs to no time in particular and has no beginning and no end. You think, for a moment, of the creatures that made these shells. Whatever they were, whatever they are no longer. You think of the long, slow time it took each one to construct its own shell around itself, depositing mineral layer on mineral layer in that spiral or cone or flat spreading form. Each layer a record of a day or a week or a month of life in the water. You think of the sea playing these shells, the ocean pushing water and air through their apertures, through their chambers, producing those ancient tones that the sea then carried away with it, scattered and lost. And now they are here, gathered, restored, given a new way to sound, not the ocean's way, not the living creature's way, but the shelf's way, the hum's way, the slow and careful way of a person who works without urgency and listens without expectation. It seems right. It seems like the right ending for a shell, or not an ending, a continuation, a different chapter of the same long, slow story the shell has always been part of. The chord shifts again. A little. The lamp flame is very small. The Shellwright's breathing is very even. Your own breathing, very slow now, very slow. The smell of the limestone, the salt, the faint, warm thread of oil, the granular memory of damp sand, the memory of cold water in a ceramic basin, the cool, dry texture of spiral ridgelines, the chord, the hum, the dark. You are sitting very still. Or perhaps you are no longer sitting. Perhaps you are resting now, drifting slightly, the way a shell drifts in a slow current, not directed, not resisted, simply moving in the direction the water chooses. The workshop is dark and quiet. The Shellwright is still. The niche wall sounds its chord, in and out, the low vibration in the stone, the thin, bright thread at the top of the chord, rising, falling, the round, warm tone at the bottom, holding, the smell of old stone and sea, the amber grain of the lamp. You are warm. You are still. You are somewhere between the shelf and sleep, that long, gradual, mineral-scented space between one thing and another, where the hum of the rock is the same as the hum of your own body settling, where the chord of the shells is the same as the sound of your own thoughts becoming gentle and slow and very far apart. The Shellwright breathes. The shells breathe. The shelf breathes, and you breathe with all of them, slowly, slowly, in the dark, in the cool mineral air, with the low, warm light barely burning, and the tide withdrawn, and the tools at rest, and 200 ancient instruments sounding their patient chord into the night. You don't need to hold on to anything, not the day, not the next thought, not even this place, this shelf, this amber grain of light. You can let it all become sound, low and steady, always there. The hum of the stone, the chord of the shells. Let it carry you. It has been carrying things for a very long time. It knows exactly how. The lamp, the dark, the hum, the chord, the smell of the stone, the cold water, the damp sand, the shells, the dark, the hum, the chord, the dark. Breathe. The chord, the hum,